Welcome back to Any Voices for part 3 of our conversation with Darla. In this episode, we explore how collaboration, feedback, and shifting classroom spaces can transform the way students learn. We dive into her creative use of windows and whiteboards to make learning visible and immediate, fostering collaboration as well as risk-taking among students. Darla shares how shifting the focus from grades to meaningful feedback creates a culture of openness and teamwork, reflecting the real-world skills students will need in their future. We delve into the power of student voice, ways to build sustainable change, and why relationships are at the heart of effective teaching. Plus, Darla shares her top 3 things she's learned so far from her assessment journey. Let's rejoin the conversation. Welcome to Northeast Voices, a podcast that spotlights the innovators and change makers in education. We're here to share the stories of inclusion, empowerment, and the impactful connections with the Northeast School Division and beyond, focusing on the pivotal role of students, families, and teachers. Join us as we dive into the conversations revealing the strategies and moments shaping the future of education. Any Voices is your platform for inspiration and connection, and is recorded in the Northeast School Division, sharing the land of Treaties 4, 5, 6, and homeland of the Métis in Northeast Saskatchewan. Be sure to subscribe and join our community of innovators and change makers. Let's get started. When we think about what it looks like in the classroom, I think when I was at a student-led conference with you and my daughter earlier in the year, you talked about the notebooks that you call them interactive notebooks. And if you're listening, I'm not sure what to call all of our viewers because it's also a video podcast. So if you're listening or
Yeah.
viewing this, and you'd like to know a little bit more about interactive notebooks or how Darla goes about collecting those types of ideas, please reach out and let us know and we can tailor those episodes. But
Absolutely.
what I was thinking is you had talked about the spaces in your classroom. So it wasn't just at a desk. Do you want to describe a little bit about how it looks in math class?
Yeah, I think our learning can happen in a whole bunch of different ways. So perhaps there is something that we need to review or something that we just need a little bit more practice with. Perhaps that we can find a space on the whiteboards. I've got a couple of whiteboards. I've got some windows. Even the fume hood window works perfectly. And we can do some practice on there. And I think one of the best things about making our work visible and our learning visible is that I can immediately see and our peers can see too. We can have those conversations right away. So it doesn't have to wait until something's been handed in or after a quiz has been given. We can immediately engage in those conversations, or maybe we're using our desk as a surface to write on. It could certainly be on a piece of paper in their notebook, but opening up the spaces to feel comfortable talking with our peers, talking with our EA, with the teacher about our learning. And that comes with a certain amount of risk for students to be
Mhm.
able to. And the more that you do it and the more you practice it and you talk about learning, and that's just a step in the right direction,
Mhm.
then the more comfortable they get with it. And I think one of the big things about the whiteboard is that you can erase it. So, oh, that didn't go so well. So perfect. I can just get rid of that and we'll just try it again. My chemistry 30 students love the whiteboards. We call it windows and whiteboards. And they love it because they were working on drawing some Lewis dot structures. And there was one that was really tricky. And I just stood in the middle of my classroom and I was like, this is what this is about. It's like they're working together, they're collaborating, they're referencing their notes, and they're okay, well, what if I tried this? And then I would notice one group member would go over to another group member and say, hey, like here's what we tried. I see that you were doing the
Mhm.
same thing that we were doing before. And that, like, to me, that is the beauty. That is learning at its best right there. Yeah.
And learning what it would look like in the real world, right? When we work
Yeah,
as part of a
absolutely.
team, we
Yep.
often seem to default into the competitive piece. So the question I was wondering about, and you hit on it with the word collaboration, and Dan mentioned this as well, is and I'm not sure if it's attached to marks. Like if you give me a mark, am I kind of competing or wondering what everybody else has? And if you shift it into the feedback, are you starting to see when you went more towards feedback that you get more collaboration happening? Like you talked about, groups are sharing with each other, they're asking each other questions, they're sharing ideas, they're looking at all of those pieces. So do you see a shift away from the competition and into collaboration?
I think so. And I think it also helps. It's just part of our classroom culture. And that assessment comes with, it doesn't always have to come from me. Like feedback can come from a peer. It could be self assessment. You can be comparing it to an answer key, even. Like, so it's part of our classroom culture to be working together. And that's something I'm pretty strategic about too. Like, I work in a lab, so they have to sit together, but at the
Mhm.
same time, we're trying to make use of all of the spaces that we do have and the opportunities that we have by mixing the students up, giving them all a chance to share in ways that feel comfortable for them, and it also comes back to that's how mathematicians and scientists think as well. And we talk a lot about how that mindset is really how a scientist thinks, and asking questions and finding patterns and seeking feedback from others is how scientists think. And so it's all part of our classroom culture.
And I like that you've mentioned the mindset and that shift to collaboration, that you create the culture, that you're strategic in how you create that. And Darla's mentioned the different whiteboards, and I like that, windows and whiteboards. I think that's my new
Yeah.
favorite thing. And using all of those spaces. And the other piece, just when people are thinking about this, they're standing. So there's a lot of research behind being vertical and in a group. I think
Mhm.
of probably at like smaller groups, probably around 3 or 4 maybe, and people are working together to solve those problems. You're connecting with others around the room, and so you can see those pieces. Like you said, there's different ways we can get feedback from a teacher, we can get feedback from a peer, we can think about it ourselves, we can reference an answer key, especially in math or something like that, to see if we're on the right
Mhm.
track. If we're thinking about how we're thinking, and I like that you've connected it to, this is how scientists work. This is how teams work in the real world. We work together to
Mhm.
solve a common problem. And so these are skills sets that we're developing for our future to become engaged, active citizens in the world. And I think when we talk about our values in the NESD, we talk about being empowered, connected, inclusive, and why do I always forget the fourth one? Empowered, include, innovative. Innovative is the one that I
Mhm.
surprisingly, that's the one I forgot today. But you're giving them new ways to think about how they're learning, and that learning isn't about a mark, it's about that understanding and how we can move forward and use that to solve problems within the world, to go deeper into connecting with others. And so with
Yeah.
that, to wrap up the podcast, and again, for all of our viewers out there, if you have any questions, please send them in to us. I will put the podcast email underneath so you can send that in and let us know if there's different topics or you'd like to see some examples of what that looks like in Edsby, or what an interactive notebook is, or a progress chart, or how do you sit down and strategically think about, how might I shift my journey? And this isn't something that you flip everything overnight. It's take those small steps forward. It could be part of your sprint goal work to work with the students. It could be, I've heard you say several times, I needed to ask the student. I need them to let me know where they're at and what they need. So how do we engage with students, and does technology sometimes support us in doing that and capturing also those moments of learning? So my last question for you is, when you look back at your journey so far, what would be the top 3 things that you've learned in this journey that you'd like to share with people?
So I think the first is that if you're going to make a change, it needs to be something that's sustainable. And to me, the easiest way to make things sustainable is to leverage student voice. That's the first thing. The second is that you will be amazed at what students can do. Listen to what they have to say, and you will be shocked at how much they will lean into a space that is flexible and collaborative and focused on learning versus labels and grades. I think it's relieving to them sometimes. And then number 3, I think the third thing is that I've over this period of time, I think one of my favorite things that's come out of all of this has been just the relationships that I've been able to build with the students through all of these changes that I've been trying to make, and just to see their growth, especially when I can see it over 4 years, it's the best. Yeah.
Very powerful journey to hear
Mm.
exactly what you shared about sustainable, leveraging students' voice. They truly do know more and have a whole wealth of knowledge and experience when you open those doors and connect with them. And building those relationships is an amazing way to dig deeper and learn more about what they know and what they need to know and where you're going on that journey. My last one to wrap it up is those are the three things that you've learned. As you think about where your journey goes next, what's one thing you're really excited about? So if you were thinking of your future self in 5 years or in 10 years as a teacher, what would you be most excited that students will have done or that you will have, because you started on this journey now, what's your future
Mhm.
self going to be excited about in 10 years?
Oh, that is a good question.
I was just thinking maybe it's better if I phrase it as what kinds of conversations will your future self as a teacher be having with students?
I hope that even with like all of, we've got the rise of AI right now. We talk a lot about technology and social media. And I hope that above all, we're always focused on our thinking and our learning. So, regardless of the content, whether we're talking about quadratic formulas or we're using a cool new AI tool to do something in a science lab, I hope that our focus is still on student teacher, student relationships. I hope that we're still focused on our thought processes and our learning, and that we don't get stuck in the content or I hope we're just focused on kind of our connections and our ability to improve things and continue to ask questions and problem solve. And those are the skills that we need to stay focused on.
And I think what you've named is in the rise of AI, which is a whole other podcast episode.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe Darla and I will have to do a debrief after IT Summit because that's the theme. But what struck me there, and you and I have had this conversation before, is with all of the tools and the technology that's available and the amount of content and the details and the rate at which the world is learning about new things that we wouldn't have known about last year
Mhm.
or 10 years ago. And that rise of AI is the skills that we need to focus on are exactly what you're talking about in this entire podcast episode, the human skills. What does it mean to be
Yes.
human and to problem solve, to be creative? How can we empower each other? How can we include everyone in that journey? How can we give voice to that? How can we innovate and make those connections so that the students can rise and shape the future
Yes.
that we have? And so I think you
Yeah.
summed that up all very, very well. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with? Or a wonder that you have for
No.
our audience?
Yeah, I guess I just am always I'm just wondering about what other people are doing in their classroom and what kinds of other cool things people do to integrate conversations and feedback, and what other kinds of systems do people use to stay focused on learning. I would love to know. I would love to hear what other people are doing as well.
And that's a great way for us to wrap up the podcast episode. So just like Darla said, if you're willing to share with us and join us on a podcast episode of Any Voices is designed to amplify the voices of teachers in the Northeast and beyond and share ideas, share the amazing things that teachers are doing in their classroom every day, because we know that once we hear new ideas, teachers have this amazing ability that it sparks a whole other set of ideas and then they can learn. And that impacts not only how they teach, but it impacts all of the students. And when we impact the students, that ripples out into the future and impacts all of us. So perfect, I wonder. If you'd like to be part of the Any Voices podcast, reach out to me and we will get you on. If you'd like to learn more from what Darla is doing, feel free to reach out to Darla or send your questions to us and
Absolutely.
we can do some follow-up episodes. So thank you so much for joining us
Yeah.
today, Darla. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Any Voices. We will see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you to Darla for sharing how reimagining classroom spaces and focusing on collaboration and feedback can unlock deeper learning and stronger connections. From the magic of windows and whiteboards to fostering a culture of openness and collaboration, in this series we explored how small intentional changes can create lasting impacts. Now, if you don't have a lot of windows or extra whiteboard space, you may have heard us mention whitebooks at our Building Thinking Classrooms or other NESD PD events. They are a tool we found helpful, so be sure to check with your school math lead or admin for more info. I'll also add it to the show notes below. Throughout this podcast, we've discussed the importance of student voice, building sustainable practices, and focusing on the human skills that will guide students into shaping the future, our future, even in a world of rapidly advancing technology. Be sure to subscribe to catch future AI and education conversations on the podcast. As we wrap up this series, I'll leave you with Darla's words. When we listen to what students have to say, you'll be amazed at how much they'll lean into a space that's flexible, collaborative, and focused on learning over labels. If that resonates with you, consider leaving us a comment on this episode. We hope that this series sparked ideas and encouraged you to wonder about the possibilities of assessment. Until next time, thank you for joining our community of innovators and change makers. We hope the conversations and stories have ignited a spark within. We'd like to express our gratitude to our dedicated Northeast educators. Until next time, remember to subscribe to Any Voices and join us on the next episode as we share the stories of learning shaping our future. Thanks for listening.